My wife is a teacher at Coon Rapids High School.
I didn't know that.
Her class sizes are 35, 36 at the moment. That's unacceptable. That's too high. And they're getting bigger. We need to provide our schools with the resources so they can get those class sizes down.
Democrat Zach Stephenson is campaigning to represent Coon Rapids and Champlin in the Minnesota House of Representatives. That's for House District 36A.
I grew up in Coon Rapids. I live a mile down the road from the house I grew up in.
Zach and his wife Austin have 2 young daughters.
They're 5 and 3.
This is part 2 of Stephenson's visit to Democratic Visions. He and Tim O'Brien considered distracted driving, congested highways in the northern suburbs, funding for better mental health care services, and funding for schools.
Zach, I kind of find that disturbing that your wife is teaching to 30 or 35, 36 students in a class. You know the problem, I know the problem. It costs more money to reduce those class sizes, and as I understand it, Anoka Hennepin school district is running at a $2 million deficit as it is. How can they afford to do the right thing and to reduce class sizes?
Well, we have to look at where that deficit comes from. And it comes from the fact that the state is not doing its fair share of funding our local schools. So state funding for education right now is $1,000 less per student what it was in 2003.
Unbelievable.
When you adjust for inflation. Yeah, it's unacceptable. And what happens is the school district attempts to compensate for that by raising local property taxes. That's really unfair for middle class families, working class families, and retirees. We actually just passed a referendum in Anoka Hennepin last November. It raised $225 a student, so not even a quarter of that $1,000 a student deficit I mentioned a minute ago. So it's really no surprise when you do the math to find out that Anoka Hennepin has a $2 million deficit going into this next school year. But you got to ask yourself, how can that be in a time when the state is enjoying a massive budget surplus, at a time when the economy is doing so well, right after we passed that referendum? How is it that the school district still has a deficit? And the answer is the state has been choosing to give away a lot more money to special interests and large businesses in these bloated tax bills they pass every year instead of funding our schools. That's what we need to fix, is we need to get the focus back on education.
And I know there's other issues that I've got on my little checklist here, but I want to turn it back to you. You've been going door to door, knocking on doors, talking to people. What issues come to the forefront when you speak to people?
The number one thing that people tell me is that they're really sick and tired of the far ends of the spectrum dominating the conversation and the gridlock that results from it. They're tired of the bickering and they're tired of the pandering. They want to see people get together, compromise, and get stuff done. It's back to that common sense. You know, we want to find the solutions to the problem, move the ball forward. Don't make the perfect the enemy of the good.
Well, you know, there's a lot of discord politically on the national level. Is that seeping down to Senate House District 36A and across the board?
People are really worried about Washington-style politics coming to Minnesota. You know, we have had a different type of politics in Minnesota over the last several decades, ones where sides can work together to get things done, to act pragmatically. But they see more and more of that Washington-style politics coming to Minnesota, and people are worried about that. And that's where I say we need to have more accountability in our politics and more common sense. Get back to the things that made our politics work in Minnesota over the last several decades.
So let's now talk about, back on my list, if you don't mind, healthcare. But I want to be a little more specific. What about mental health care? Does that come up at all?
Oh, all the time, Tim. I'm so glad you brought it up because it's such a huge issue that doesn't get nearly enough conversation. Is the real mental health crisis that we're having in Minnesota and across the state.
Describe it to me.
I was talking to the chief of Coon Rapids Police just a couple of weeks ago. He told me in the last few years the number of mental health calls that they have had to respond to as a police force have risen from 400 to 1,200. It's tripled. Okay, I can tell you from my own work as a prosecutor, I see so many people coming through the doors who have untreated mental illness. Oftentimes they self-medicate with drugs and they become addicted to drugs or alcohol, and that creates additional criminal behavior. And our system is just absolutely strained. There isn't enough good treatment options for people to go to. There's still a stigma around mental health. People don't think about it the same as they think about a physical sickness. And we need to work to change that. You know, if we're ever going to have any hope of making progress on these issues. We have to get at that stigma, and then we have to provide people with the resources to treat their illnesses.
I'm glad we talked about that. Now I want to take it from a slightly different angle, and that's healthcare as a broader base. Obviously, on a national level, healthcare is an emerging situation, and it's also there's some various ins and outs going on in Minnesota. What would you care, or what would you choose if you had the option to have Minnesotans follow relative to health care for all, for example?
Well, the number one thing we need to do is find a way to make sure that everyone has access to affordable, quality health care.
That's easy to say,
right?
What's the way to implement that?
Yeah, well, there's a few different things we need to do. One thing that I really like to see happen is giving people the option of buying into Minnesota Care if they want to. So Minnesota Care is a government program that we have that gives access to the working poor to health care. But it's restricted to people who make under a certain amount of money. Mm-hmm. I think that every Minnesotan should have the option of buying into that system, paying their own way, paying the premiums into that system if that's what they want to do. And I think it would make a lot of sense for people who are small business owners or self-employed. My parents are a great example. They own a small business in Coon Rapids and have for several decades. And right now they're paying $14,000 a year in premiums, and they have a $15,000 a year deductible. That's not health insurance, that's hit by a bus insurance. Uh-huh. If they had the option of buying into Minnesota Care and having a reasonable premium and a reasonable deductible, they would absolutely take it. So let's give them that option. Why shouldn't they be able to buy into it?
And do your constituents, do you think, support that?
I do. I talk to people all the time who want more affordable, accessible health care, who want more choices. I think that it would be a very popular idea.
What other issues occur to you? For example, are there any initiatives that you'd like to pursue in the environmental area at the state level? Yeah,
absolutely. We need to make sure that we have clean air and clean water for everyone. That oftentimes we think of that as an issue that's very far away, but in our district we have the Mississippi running right through the middle of it. Mm-hmm. And as it goes through Coon Rapids and Champlin, the Mississippi is actually an impaired waterway.
What does that mean?
It's impaired with agricultural pollution.
Oh, runoff.
Runoff, yeah. From the Crow River comes into the Mississippi just north of where we live, just north of Champlin, and it takes the Mississippi from being a relatively clean waterway to a polluted waterway because of agricultural runoff. It's still safe to swim in, but it's trending in the wrong direction. And I want to make sure that the river is safe enough for my children's children to be able to play in just the way that I did when I was growing up, the way that my kids are now.
Well, so what does that entail? Stricter buffer laws, more widespread application? How does that work?
There's a few different things that we need to do. That you mentioned the buffer laws. So this is a requirement that in agricultural land there's some buffer between the place where they're applying pesticides and fertilizer and the water to make sure it doesn't get into the water. There's also finding the specific points where pollution's entering the water and working to control that, doing more enforcement on environmental to make sure that everyone's following the rules, because we want everyone to be following the rules that we have already. There's a number of things that we could be doing.
Your Republican predecessor, Mark Uglum,
That's right. You did.
Pronounce that correctly? I looked, obviously he's retired, so he's not running again, but he had one bill that he was carrying, and he apparently had done a heck of a job with his Republican counterparts, because he had a vast majority of them ready to sign on, and the Democrats would have jumped on it, of course, if it had come to a vote, and that's this hands-free phone policy. What's your take on that?
I think it's a great idea. I thought Mark had the right idea. Again, this is a common sense issue, right? We all know someone who has suffered a consequence because of distracted driving. We know, our common sense tells us that you can't be texting or using Facebook or even having the phone up to the ear while you're driving. You need to be paying attention to the road. So this was a common sense idea. It should have become law. Mark did a great job pushing it all the way. It was unfortunately the leadership in the House that blocked it. The Republican leadership. And it just tells me that we need a change in leadership, because that's the kind of common sense thing that's a no-brainer.
Well, actually, it's slightly different than that, isn't it? It's not a change in leadership. It's just not, you don't want X here instead of Y. What you need is the Democrats in control so they are able to bring the correct bills to the floor for actual debate and vote. Isn't that right?
Right. We need to have people who will pursue those common sense, no-brainer solutions.
John Hoffman is the senator for 36.
That's right.
Do you work with John much?
I've known John for many years. He's a great guy. I particularly admire his advocacy for the disabled community. That's what he's been working on. He's out working really hard to try and to get some additional funding for the disabled
You think
community.
that's going to happen?
I'm not optimistic, but I think it should happen. I think we should have more support. I think it was a terrible way that the session ended last year.
Let's go to one of my centerpiece arguments or positions I'd like to get your thoughts on, and that is the economy as it relates to infrastructure improvement. Do you have any thoughts along those lines?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, particularly in the northern suburbs, we see that our local economy is held
Now,
back.
do you guys think that the northern suburbs are kind of the stepchild of the metropolitan area? I sort of sense that from time to time, and they might be. I don't know.
We don't think it, we know it.
Is that right? Really?
Yeah, I mean, we see, I think that Highway 10, for example, as it goes between Anoka and Blaine, is among the most congested roads in the Twin Cities. I mean, the traffic on Highway 10 during rush hour in the morning or in the evening rivals the traffic of anywhere else in the metro, and that shouldn't be. That road should have been fixed a long time ago. We see that in some of our other major arteries coming into the northern suburbs, one is 169, which is under construction, painfully so right now. Mm-hmm. We see it from the fact that we're missing a bridge crossing over the Mississippi River. We need another one very badly between Dayton and Ramsey. We just haven't gotten the infrastructure improvements that we need in the northern suburbs, and it really is holding back our local economy.
Well, is it another way of stating that if you get a good, competent, aggressive legislature from 36A, that would be very much of a help in accomplishing that?
If I get elected, I'm going to be working every day
and
on getting those infrastructure improvements put into place, because we need them. We need them to move our economy forward and to improve our quality of life in the northern suburbs.
Here's an opportunity to deliver whatever message you think is appropriate to your future constituents. Tell them what you're thinking about, why you would want to serve them, and what you hope to accomplish going forward.
The stakes are high right now. I think any parent of small children recognizes that we are in a world today that causes people great concern. The good news is I think that most of the problems that we face have common sense solutions. And if we can just set aside the partisanship and the ideology and the bickering and focus on the areas where we agree, we can make tremendous progress. As a prosecutor, I don't get to live in a world of partisanship and ideology. If I went into court and told a jury, hey, you should convict this guy because my political party says he's guilty, I'd be fired in a minute, right? It's about facts and evidence in my job as a prosecutor. It should be about facts and evidence in politics as well. And it should be about those common sense, middle ground solutions that just get the ball moving forward, solving our problems one step at a time. That's what I'll focus on if I get elected.
I got a pretty good idea that come November, you're going to be the legislature from 36A. Nice to see you again,
Yeah,
Zach.
thank you so much.
Democratic Visions is handcrafted by volunteers from Eden Prairie, Hopkins, Edina, Minnetonka, and Bloomington. Watch us on select cable systems and on our YouTube channel. This is Carol Sundstrom.